let's talk about the world of private equity. And so this is where I met Kevin. We both worked at private equity together. He and I were associates at Vector Capital, working on deals into the wee hours, and getting Chinese takeout and eating in the conference rooms until midnight. But what motivated you to make that transition from Guggenheim over to PE after banking? Like, was this just the same thing that everyone else was doing? Was it all your class, or was there something that was like actually interesting to you about this transition?
Yeah, I mean, private equity was really interesting. It's like, oh, you get more of a operational perspective with the companies. You're on the buy side, working as an investor, making the decisions. But I do ultimately think that like part of my recruiting for private equity was that I got swept up a little bit in the hype, right? So I recruited for private equity on the on-cycle process, for which for us took place just after Halloween of our fall.
Yeah.
And right, for me, it was a little bit of like, oh, like this is what the top bucket, this is what the top people in banking are going to go do, is they recruit for on cycle. I'm like, oh, I'm one of those people, so like I should go do this too.
Yeah.
And I absolutely, like, I don't regret my decision. I think it was great for myself at the time. I do also think that it's okay to not recruit for on cycle, and to take time to consider what is it that you really want to do, because it happens so early, right? Take the time to figure out, what's the best match and what's the best fit for you. And so the frank answer is I got caught up in this in the hype of it.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that happens to the best of us. Like, it's very hard to have a differentiated perspective on whether or not you want to actually do private equity if everyone else is doing it. And so it's just the easy path, even though it's extraordinarily hard. It's also in some ways the easy path to continue doing that. And I think that does lead a lot of people to like burn out on it, and to like not actually end up enjoying and sticking around for that marathon, because they didn't actually consider whether or not it was something that they actually wanted to do in the first place. And so when we think about the PE experience for you, like, what was the biggest adjustment moving from that banking execution focused thing to developing investor judgment, and like ending up in a new firm, new industry? And I think you moved into a new city. You went from East Coast to West Coast too, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's right. I think the biggest adjustments when it comes to investment banking to PE is that in private equity, you have to really understand what each company you're looking at does. Really understand the revenue line items, really understand how the industry works. I worked for years covering IT services while I was in investment banking, and I had no idea what IT services did. And so when you're working in private equity, you have to really build that understanding. And on top of that, the big transition is you need to be able to form your own opinions. I think in my time from private equity, that is by far and away the biggest takeaway that I have from that industry learning, is that you have to be able to form your own opinions, have your own perspective, and come to your own judgment on different information and bits that you're given.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times in investment banking, especially when you're in the junior roles, right, it can be very prescribed in some regards, and like, hey, process X thing, then process Y thing, and then this is what we need, and we need to show it in this format. Whereas things can be very open-ended in private equity, and when there's not a clear answer, you have to go figure out a clear answer and then come up with some perspective around it yourself.
Yeah. No, I totally remember the exact same thing happening to me. Like, one of the first couple weeks while I was in private equity, like I was building a model, and like I did a good job on the model and stuff, and I showed up with the investment committee deck or whatever. I go into the office, and the managing director looks at me. He's like, "Okay, so what do you think? Should we do the deal?" I was like, are you talking to someone else? Like, is there another person in the room? And I was like, wait a second, you actually want to know what I think. And the thing I didn't realize is that like in PE, the deal teams are even leaner sometimes than what they have in banking.
Yeah.
So like they just don't have time to do all of the actual thinking. And that's why they're paying you more. They're paying you to think, not just to like be an Excel monkey for the first time. And so that was a huge shift. I totally agree that that's very hard for a lot of people to develop. And the people that don't develop that, ultimately, like, they can execute deals, but they're never going to be like the investors who really do good deals later down in their career. And so with that, like, were there any parts of the job that were challenging for you outside of this, like, developing opinions? Or were there, on the other side of things, parts that you really enjoyed?
Yeah. On the downsides first, or things that were challenging, I think goes to what you're saying about the teams are even leaner in private equity, and that your brain is just tired. I think that like we joked when in our private equity days, we were like, man, I miss the days where I could just do a good logo page,
Yes.
just
Yeah.
like put on some music, let me toss these logos on a page,
Yeah.
like ship out the deck.
Yeah.
Whereas in private equity, right, like you're like, oh my God, like this just needs to be get done as fast as possible,
Yeah.
such that I can move on to the next thing that I have to think about.
Mm-hmm.
And um, I think the weeks that when you are busier, right? If you take a 100-hour banking week versus a 100-hour private equity week,
Mm-hmm.
the 100-hour private equity work I think is going to be much more intense
Mm-hmm.
because there's a
Yeah.
lot more responsibilities that split across fewer people,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to do all the thinking associated with it,
Yeah.
not just the processing of it.
Exactly.
Things that I loved and about private equity is that you get an unparalleled access to the C-suite of every company basically that you are speaking with and interacting with.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just something that you don't get in basically any other industry. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, of course you get it in investment banking as well, but not quite at the same velocity that you're working with
Yeah.
with PE firms.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that people realize when they step away from PE, like, oh, suddenly I'm not just always emailing the CEO or the COO. Like I guess I
Yeah.
have to interact with everybody else in the company associated with it. But I
Yeah.
think when you are able to hear so often the perspectives of the C-suite management team, of how they view their business, and then you get to repeat these conversations in 10 different industries over the course of a month,
Mm-hmm.
that is something that is just so uniquely interesting to private equity that you don't get anywhere else.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And echo both of those points. Indeed, it is like somehow more mentally exhausting to work 100 hours a week in private equity because you're thinking at a deeper level. And maybe that's true if you make it to the senior levels of banking. Like I'm sure as you become an
Right.
associate VP there, you're doing that too. But the more senior you get, like the more responsibility you feel for the work. And that really, really does like take a mental toll. It's also more rewarding in a lot of ways, but it's harder. And I do miss those logo page days where you could just turn your brain off and put headphones on. But interestingly, I think that that's probably also something we're seeing shift with AI. Is a lot of those like low value tasks are getting automated, and so you probably are going to see that like the moments where you're on, you have to be on at a higher level in banking going forward, which just
Mhm.
makes it all the more important that you find ways to go off and decompress and like keep that balance. And so looking back and juxtaposing these things, you had the analyst experience at Guggenheim, you had the PE experience at Vector. Like, what enabled you to do well at Vector? Because like you were a good associate, people liked working with you, and like you were able to do some really interesting deals. And so, what enabled you at Guggenheim to succeed at Vector?
Yeah, I think the same thing always applies in terms of like your attitude, right? Come in ready to learn, come in looking to help out, and that's always going to serve you well.
Mm-hmm.
I think specifically, right, like there's a reason that there's not that many people who go into private equity directly. There's a reason that there's not many all that many entry level positions in private equity.
Mm-hmm.
I think some of the really important learnings that you get from investment banking is right, just first like a sense of how these deals are structured and how they work and how they flow. Like what is the nature of deals coming together, falling apart, and then coming back together again. The other big things that serve you really well in private equity from skills that you pick up in investment banking is being able to manage across multiple tasks,
Mm-hmm.
stakeholders, and work streams at a single time, and be able to keep everything moving at a good pace.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last thing that comes to mind is that in banking, you just get such a strong technical foundation, as well as like you build really good work habits on like how do I present my work, how do I get this work output done,
Mm-hmm.
how do I balance this with something else that has a competing interest in my task, and getting used to that pace
Mm-hmm.
is all going to prepare you all for the better once you're in private equity if that's the path that you choose to take.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think a lot of people, like we said, do sort of follow that path. They go from the investment banking to the private equity. It builds on the skills and the responsibilities.